After all, isn't it substance, the UN of the world, that supposedly motivates you at least a little bit to come out on an evening when you could have been down at Rockefeller Center among 500,000 people to see Obama flick the switch to light the tree. And I want first to observe that this size of a turnout at an annual meeting of the Southern New York State Division is a very impressive sign of the UN Association's rejuvenation and of its rebuilding in this region. We would attribute it in part, I think, to the energies that have gone into the regional conferences over the past few years, the building outreach, but I think we have to attribute it in largest part to Ginger Stillman's relentless pursuit of us as individuals and of new members and of new chapters, without which we wouldn't have the kind of energy that has produced this kind of revitalization. So thank you, Ginger. Now, Ginger had indicated that the theme of next year's regional conference is going to be 2012 Year of Decision. Guess whose decision we are talking about? The UN in American foreign policy. And we had gone around the horn of what should be the theme and decided that one was important because, in effect, whether voters are thinking about the foreign policy side or not, when they feel either agitated or disgruntled or satisfied with the direction of the nation, that is part of the package that will be on the block in which voters make their choice next November. And there's no doubt that we have seen a significant, maybe not total, but a significant change of direction in American foreign policy with a much more UN prism view of the world in the past 3 years than we had had. Oh, do I need to pick any particular 8-year period before? Just take a look at this year, which has been a tumultuous year in so many ways. It began with Arab Spring, the very event that Ginger told us came to its climax right during our regional conference this year in Egypt, which is the mother of all Arab countries in a sense in terms of size and influence. And then the painful sorting out since then in Egypt and Tunisia, both of them relatively peacefully, achieving goals of change, opening up, of real, genuine public participation. Then places like Libya and Syria, where change has not been as easily accomplished, or Bahrain, where it has apparently been snuffed out. And this has occupied an enormous amount of our news hole for foreign affairs all this year. Something that has gotten far less attention has been the peaceful separation of South Sudan from the Khartoum-controlled government in northern Sudan by a referendum of the people, a 95% vote for independence, a peaceful separation, although there are still tensions along the, in places, disputed border separating the north from the south. But that in itself is a major accomplishment in the world that the American media, the American political class don't pay that much attention to. There was another vote. It was actually last November in Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa that also hasn't gotten that much attention in the American press. It was disputed by an incumbent who refused to give up and whose resort to force to crush popular insistence that we had an election, you're supposed to respect it, finally led to international interventions. You had UN peacekeepers there, ratcheting up to a level of use of force to send him packing. And indeed, just this week, it is announced that he is being sent to The Hague for trial by the International Court, Criminal Court, which is itself a product of initiatives by people in UNA USA 15 years ago to get the court created. And we shouldn't forget UNA's role in helping create a new institution that remains challenged and contentious in Washington political circles. Just this week, we see the still painful first unfolding of the democratic elections in Egypt. Tunisia had successfully had its election a few weeks ago. Just in the past 2 days, there's been a massive and massively problem-ridden election in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the largest territory by far in all of Africa, and one in which it turns out the incumbent can't count on just being sashayed in for another term. We've also had this year, and this has gotten lots of ink, and we can discuss why, the bid of Palestine for UN recognition as a state, UN membership as a state, which has truly convulsed American politics. And we can pursue that in Q&A if you like, but I put that out there as what was in fact probably the one issue at the UN in this fall session that had the American press and the Washington political class all agape and gabbing for weeks on end. And when the Palestinians won membership in UNESCO, that was viewed in Washington as a thunderbolt that had to be turned aside. And indeed, it is complicating the issues of American payment of its dues to international organizations. But one should note that in terms of elections, there have been almost unnoticed, because we pay as much attention to Europe now as we do to Canada. But in Europe, there's been a succession of elections in which, in every case this year, the incumbent government has been thrown out. This is a sign of how the economic crisis is coloring voters' perceptions. And Europe's particular economic crisis within the Eurozone has even resulted in the overthrow of one political leader without having to resort to an election. And I think of the almost legendary Silvio Berlusconi, whose antics had drawn a good deal of attention, much more than his public policy. But we also have, and this weekend we have seen the latest aftershock, might be the foreshock, of a series of tremors in the relationship of Pakistan to the outside world, and particularly the United States. Back in January, you had this American CIA contractor who shot and killed 2 Pakistani intelligence agents who were trailing him, and a huge diplomatic row in which, to my mind, unbelievably, the President of the United States went on TV to demand the release of our diplomat, our man, and a diplomat. Ray Davis certainly was not. Then we had the raid that took out Osama bin Laden, that touched off in Pakistan. Not a sigh of relief that this guy has finally been found, but outrage at violation of sovereignty. And we had 2 weeks ago great outrage in Pakistan about the purported offer slipped on an anonymous blank sheet of paper by an untrustworthy courier from the ambassador of Pakistan in Washington a couple of years ago, supposedly. No, excuse me, just early this year, right after the bin Laden killing, several months ago, asking whether the United States would help if the president were to take on the military, substantially reduce their control. And this touched off a huge reaction among nationalists in Pakistan, and then the event of early last Saturday morning, which feeds into what is likely to be the derailing of the big Bonn II conference, the 10th anniversary of the UN convened conference 10 years ago that tried to put together a new government in Afghanistan. This week, or this coming week, the German government, which is again hosting, not UN-sponsored. The Americans didn't want a UN-sponsored conference, thank you, nor did President Karzai. The German government had hoped that this would be the occasion to bring Taliban delegates to begin to start a real peace negotiation. Well, someone, I won't say yet who, but someone indicated that the Taliban would not be welcome. Now Pakistan isn't going to go because of the events of the weekend. Iran may not go. So essentially this big international conference becomes not an opportunity to advance on a different road to peace than 10 years of war, but basically a reaffirmation of what is American default policy. If you don't have a negotiated peace, keep sending money, training troops, paying for troops, Afghan troops, and keeping enough American troops in perpetuity there as a kind of backup and deterrent after you turn over major responsibility to the Afghan government. This, I would submit, is a formula, if we're lucky, that just gives us another 10 years of war without us having to fight it much. We're going into December now, wrapping up this year without all of the things we might have hoped for having come to pass. So we go into next year, into the regional conference, into this year of decision, with a task of advocacy, not just of contacting members of Congress, but of contacting our neighbors, our publics, through whatever media we have, about the importance of America's international engagement. When I look at the field of candidates who offer themselves as alternatives to the current leadership for the presidency for next year, what impresses me most is how most of them seem to be frozen in the worldview of 2003, 2004. And the talk of bombing Iran, or at least having the Israelis do it for us, or of assassinating Iranian scientists, or of opposing the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq, and opposing the pace of withdrawal that Obama has committed in Afghanistan. There are few exceptions, John Huntsman in particular, and they're curmudgeonly, but at least on international interventionism, sane Ron Paul, even if he's a nut on many domestic issues from a liberal voter's point of view. But by and large, the direction isn't always positive, and we need to deploy ourselves to try to get our political class in our own region focused in a positive direction on these issues. Because this year, 2012, will either be the year in which we lock in as permanent American policy the notion of the U.S. as a constructive part of a world order built on rule of law, dedicated to promoting peace, security, and prosperity, or we revert to dreams of a new American century that an ever-growing defense budget will secure for us. That's what the stakes will be in this year of decision. So thank you for allowing me to share this kind of tour d'horizon with you, and I hope that that may provoke a little bit of discussion.
That was Mastery of the World, Jeff.